Imagine stepping forward in the Auschwitz starvation bunker.
Yeah, it is almost impossible to really picture that.
It really is.
Okay.
And if you are listening to this right now and trying to visualize that scene, you probably assume an act like that requires this sudden, blinding flash of unimaginable courage, like an emotional surge that just overtakes a person completely.
Sure, that is the standard assumption we all make.
But what if it was actually just math? I mean, what if it was the inevitable logical result of a lifelong equation of physics?
Oh, wow. That is a completely different way to frame it.
Yeah. Today, we are extracting the core insights from the source texts of St. Maximilian Kolbe. We are going to look at a vision of reality where love is not just some fleeting sentiment.
Far from it.
Yeah, for him, love is the fundamental physics of existence. It is this eternal flame that literally dictates the descent of grace from God and the ascent of creation back to its creator.
Which requires a complete reorientation of how we normally categorize things, Well, we usually place gravity and electromagnetism in the category of structural objective laws. And then love gets relegated to the realm of subjective feeling. Like it is just an emotion.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
But he collapses those two categories entirely.
His final action was the historical fulfillment of his theological thesis. So to understand the action, we really must start at the very foundation of his thought.
Let's start building that foundation.
Uh-huh.
And for him, the bedrock is drawn from the first letter of John, chapter 4, verse 16. The verse simply says, God is love.
But he doesn't just quote it as a nice piece of poetry, does he?
Not at all. He builds an entire cosmology out of it. He looks at the Trinity, and he sees love as the defining eternal action.
Okay, let's unpack that, because he describes the inner life of the Trinity as a perpetual ebb and flow of love.
Yeah, an active, moving reality.
The Father generates the Son from eternity, and the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son.
The mechanism is eternal generation and procession. He states that this love, it flames eternally.
Flames eternally.
It is a burning reality. Yep. It's never static. When he says the Holy Spirit is the flowering, he means that the love between the Father and the Son is so infinitely intense and real that it is a distinct person.
Oh, I see. So the love itself is the person.
Yeah, God is love. And because every effect in philosophy is similar to its cause, all of creation is an echo or distant semblance of this Trinitarian life.
Wait, let me extrapolate from that for a second. If you view the Trinity strictly through this lens of a perpetual ebb and flow of eternal love, that fundamentally shifts how you view your own existence.
It changes everything.
If the ultimate cause of everything is this eternal burning love, then literally everything that exists, every atom, every person, every star, is an offshoot of that specific eternal action. It changes creation from being a cold industrial process into an overflow of this eternal love.
That is the logical conclusion he draws from the premise.
Yeah.
God knows his own finite semblances in their various degrees. He loves them, and he calls some into existence. That is how creatures originate.
But I have a structural problem with this.
Okay, lay it out.
If God's love is already perfect and already complete and infinitely fulfilled within the closed loop of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, why create anything at all? Why introduce finite, flawed creatures into the mix if the equation is already perfectly balanced?
The texts actually provide his explicit answer to that apparent contradiction.
Oh, really? What does he say?
God creates out of love, but he describes this action of creation as a kind of separation.
Separation?
Yeah.
That sounds like a mistake. Or a rift. How can a perfect love create a separation?
It is a distancing, but a purposeful one. He writes that this separation exists for the sake of a future, deliberate unification.
A future unification. Okay, go on.
In his words, unification is love, creative love. The activity of God outside himself does not proceed otherwise. God creates the universe, and this action is, in a sense, a separation.
Let me try to visualize this. It is like releasing a pendulum.
A pendulum, I like that.
Yeah. You draw the pendulum back, separating it from its resting point so that it can swing back. The separation is the mechanical prerequisite for the kinetic energy of the return. You can't have the return swing without the initial separation.
That captures it. The creatures, by following the natural law implanted in them, reach their perfection and become like him.
So they swing back toward the center.
Yeah. And for rational creatures, they are meant to love him in a conscious manner, unite themselves to him, and so find their way back. The separation provides the necessary space for the joy of a freely chosen return.
Which means if creation is a separation meant to end in unification, there has to be a mechanism for creation to return to God. You cannot just have the outward swing. You need the return trajectory.
You need both halves of the arc.
And this leads us directly to how he maps spiritual life onto natural law. This is where we get into the actual physics of grace.
He explicitly compares the spiritual life to the natural law of action and reaction. It is essentially Newton's third law applied to theology.
I barely passed high school physics, but I do know that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. How does he map that onto grace?
The action is God's love descending to earth. He traces this descent from the Father through the Son and the Holy Spirit, descends every act of God's love.
So every single grace is that initial action.
Yeah, this includes creative acts, acts that maintain our existence, and the infusion of supernatural grace. That is the initial downward force.
So every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of grace is the initial action pushing down from God. What is the reaction then?
The equal and opposite reaction is creation's love returning to the Father. Everywhere in the world, he notes, we see departure and return, going away and coming back.
But there is a glaring issue with this.
What is that?
In physics, a rock doesn't choose to react to gravity, it just falls. The reaction is automatic and guaranteed by the laws of physics. But for rational creatures, for humanity, this return reaction isn't automatic. We have free will.
That is the crux of the human condition in his theology. He states that God only, and no other, is the creator of the act of love of creatures. But if one of these creatures is endowed with free will, this act does not take place without their consent.
So the physics of grace require a conscious, volitional choice to complete the circuit. It isn't automatic.
It requires our participation. And this brings us to a point where his teachings demand you delete your normal definition of love.
Delete it entirely.
Yeah. When we hear the word love, we immediately default to emotions. We think of warmth, affection, feeling peaceful in a chapel, or, a sense of spiritual high. He strips all of that away entirely.
He strips away the emotion. That sounds intense.
He is quite emphatic on this point in the sources. He teaches that the essence of our love for God does not lie in experiencing sweetness. It does not lie in remembering, thinking, understanding, imagining, or shedding tears.
Wow. So none of the things we normally associate with religious devotion.
No. It is situated primarily and perhaps exclusively in the will.
So it is strictly the conformity of the human will to God's will. It is a structural alignment, not a feeling.
Yeah. He writes that even in the midst of aversion, reluctance, or profound suffering, true love is simply the choice to fulfill God's will.
So you could be completely miserable, emotionally speaking, but still be perfectly exercising love.
The emotional state of the person making the choice is secondary or even completely irrelevant to the reality of the love being exercised.
Let me try to map this out using a physical phenomenon. Think about sympathetic resonance.
Oh, with sound waves.
Yeah. If you have two tuning forks pitched to the exact same frequency, say an A note, and you strike one, the sound waves will travel across the room and cause the second tuning fork to spontaneously vibrate.
Because they share the same frequency.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter if the second tuning fork is made of pristine silver and feels cold to the touch, or if it is battered, scratched brass and feels warm. It doesn't matter what the instruments feel like.
The feeling is irrelevant to the resonance.
What matters is their structural resonant frequencies. That alignment is the love.
That captures the mechanics perfectly. The will is the tuning fork. And because love is located in the structural alignment of the will, he makes an incredible claim about its power in the sources.
What kind of claim?
He writes that a single act of perfect love has the power to wash the soul clean of all sin, even serious sin repeatedly committed.
I have to admit that sounds almost too simple, or too lenient if we were thinking legalistic terms. A lifetime of mistakes erased by a single act.
It seems that way until we realize what a perfect act of love actually entails in his framework.
Okay, bring that down for us.
If love is an act of the will, a perfect act of love means a complete, unreserved, total realignment of the human will to God's will. It's a complete surrender.
So it's not just saying a quick prayer, it's structural.
Yeah. When that friction of rebellion or selfishness is entirely removed, the soul is instantly purified because it is perfectly resonating with God. The static is gone.
But the reality is, human beings are incredibly flawed. Our tuning forks are bent out of shape. Our reaction of love back to the Father is almost always imperfect, tainted by self-interest, distraction, or just fatigue.
We constantly produce static.
Yeah, we cannot produce a perfect reaction on our own.
And that imperfection creates a major problem in his physics of grace. If the action from God is infinite and perfect, The equal and opposite reaction should also be perfect to complete the circuit properly.
The math doesn't balance if our reaction is flawed.
So to achieve a perfect creaturely response, God willed a perfect creaturely reaction.
Which forces us to look at how he solves this broken equation. He introduces the motive for the incarnation and the Immaculate Conception. If we are looking for a perfect reaction, we have to look at what he calls the zenith of love.
According to the source texts, love is the primary motive for both the incarnation of Jesus and the Immaculate Conception of Mary. And here we enter some of his most profound and perhaps most challenging theological reflections.
Challenging in what way?
We need to examine the specific structural relationship between the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary.
We touched on the Holy Spirit earlier as the flowering of love. Let's dig deeper into the vocabulary he uses here, because it is entirely unique. He calls the Holy Spirit the uncreated eternal conception.
It is a very striking phrase.
Now, I have to push back on that phrasing. By definition, a conception is a beginning. It is a creation. Calling the Holy Spirit an uncreated conception sounds like an oxymoron. How is he not just playing with words here?
He arrives at this terminology through a very tight logical progression. He asks, what is the Holy Spirit? The Spirit is the fruit of the love of the Father and the Son.
Okay, we established that.
He reasons that if the fruit of created love is a created conception, a new life, then the fruit of God's love, which is the prototype of all created love, must also be a conception.
Oh, I see the parallel he is drawing.
Because God is eternal and uncreated, this conception must be eternal and uncreated. He's taking the biological reality of conception and tracing it back to its ultimate eternal source.
So, because the love between the Father and the Son bears eternal fruit, that fruit, the Spirit, is an eternal, uncreated conception. It is the prototype for all life-giving unions. It is the original blueprint.
Yeah, and then he pairs this uncreated reality with a created one. If the Holy Spirit is the uncreated Immaculate Conception, Mary is the created Immaculate Conception.
And the relationship between them is described as an inner union that is so rigorous, so essential, that he says the traditional title, Spouse of the Holy Spirit, is only a pale shadow of the reality.
He argues that in created beings, the union of marriage two, becoming one flesh, is the closest possible union. But the Holy Spirit lives in the soul of Mary, in her very being, making her fruitful from the first moment of her existence.
So it's a much deeper integration than a marriage.
He writes that the Spirit permeates her so ineffably that spouse doesn't quite capture the depth of the integration. He even uses the phrase that she is, in a certain sense, the incarnation of the Holy Spirit.
Wait, really? The incarnation of the Holy Spirit?
He immediately qualifies that with a quasi to avoid heresy. He calls it a quasi-incarnation.
We need to slow down and look closely at that qualification. Calling Mary a quasi-incarnation of the Holy Spirit sounds like it borders on elevating a human being to the level of the Trinity. That is a massive theological claim. How does he justify this language without crossing established Orthodox boundaries?
He is very careful to define the boundaries. He explicitly notes that she remains a finite creature. He uses the theological concept of the hypostatic union to explain the difference.
Let's define that for the listener. The hypostatic union refers to Jesus, right?
Yeah. In Jesus, there are two natures, God and man, but only one person. That is the hypostatic union. In Mary's union with the Holy Spirit, there are two natures and two distinct persons.
So she does not become God. Her personhood is not absorbed or annihilated.
She remains Mary, a human creature. However, because she never deviated from God's will for a single instant, her will is perfectly fused with God's.
Her tuning fork is flawlessly aligned.
She is God's instrument in the most perfect way possible, without the slightest blemish of selfishness. Her consent is so total that her actions are the actions of the Holy Spirit working through her. She acts freely, but she desires only what the Spirit desires.
It is a functional and volitional unity, not a structural blending of persons. They remain two distinct persons, but their wills are operating as one single force.
That is the core of it. And this is why he calls her the zenith of love, or the apex of love. In her, he teaches, the miracle of the union of God with creation takes place.
The zenith, the absolute peak where the two realities meet.
It is the ultimate meeting point. In this union, he writes, all of heaven meets all of the earth. All uncreated love, the Holy Spirit, meets all created love, Mary.
And going back to the physics analogy, the action of God descending finds its perfect, equal, and opposite reaction in her continuous, sinless choice to align her will with God.
The circuit is finally completed perfectly.
So, if Mary is the perfect vessel of love returning to the Father, the flawless reaction to God's action, where does that leave the rest of us? As we established, our tuning forks are bent. If our goal is to participate in this perfect return of love, it seems we have to associate ourselves with her.
We have to get connected to that perfect circuit.
We have to somehow draft behind her perfect reaction to solve our broken physics.
That is the practical, mechanical application of his entire theological structure. For flawed humans to participate in this perfect love, they must associate themselves entirely with her. This is the path of perfect love, which he articulates as total consecration.
Total consecration to the Immaculate Virgin Mary. Now, the sources do not frame this as just a nice devotional prayer you say in the morning to feel spiritual. The language is uncompromising. It is a complete transfer of ownership.
The terms he uses are explicitly legal and absolute. It means offering one soul, all faculties including intellect, will, and memory, the body, and all past, present, and future works.
All of it. Nothing held back.
The consecration formula refers to giving oneself as property and possession, to be used as an instrument in her hands.
Property and possession. That is incredibly heavy language. Handing over your intellect and your memory as property. I mean, we value our autonomy so much that word property is tough to swallow.
He actually draws a sharp distinction to make his point clear. He says a servant sells his work. You, on the other hand, offer up toil, suffering, of all yourself as a gift.
So a servant is still holding something back.
A servant retains ownership of themselves and simply trades their labor for wages. A consecrated soul relinquishes ownership entirely. She is the owner of yourself, the text reads.
Okay, let's explore the actual mechanics of why this transfer of ownership is necessary. How does consecration actually open us up to love in a special way? We established earlier that love is the alignment of the will. How does giving my will to her align my will with God? What is the actual process here?
It solves the problem of our flawed reaction. Because Mary is sinless, when we give our flawed acts of love to her, she purifies them of their imperfections.
How does that filtering process work? Does she just absorb our selfish intent? Like a sponge?
The sources explain it through the concept of mediation and perfect alignment. When you relinquish ownership of your actions to her, those actions become hers.
Because you are her property.
Yeah. And because her will is perfectly united to the Holy Spirit, anything she owns and offers is presented through that perfect union. She takes our acts of love, removes the static of our self-interest, and offers them to Jesus as though they were her own without stain.
Oh, I see.
Jesus then gives them infinite value and presents them to the Father.
By merging our will with hers, we are perfectly merging our will with God's. Because her will is already perfectly aligned with God. It removes the friction of our own selfishness.
It's an elegant solution to the problem of our broken will.
Going back to our tuning forks, if we cannot tune ourselves directly to God's frequency because our instrument is damaged, we tune ourselves to her, who is already vibrating in perfect harmony with God. By being in harmony with her, we are brought into harmony with God.
That is the exact mechanism he envisions. And once a person is consecrated, once they are filled with this purified love, the sources insist that this love cannot remain static.
It has to move.
It is not just about personal holiness or feeling peaceful in your room while reading theology. It has an active, consuming nature.
It leads to the mission of love. The texts frequently use the phrase, love lives and spreads like fire. It cannot be contained.
And that is how he viewed the work of the church and his own organization. The goal of all his efforts, the publishing, the friaries, the movements he started, was never just administrative success or building an institution.
It wasn't about numbers.
The goal was always to set the earth on fire and conquer souls so that the kingdom of the Sacred Heart would reign.
Fire is a fascinating metaphor to use here, but we need to look at how fire actually functions. A contagion of light is one thing. You take a lit candle into a dark room, light another candle, and the environment is brighter while the original flame loses nothing.
It's a gentle spread.
But fire is more aggressive than that. Fire requires fuel, it transforms what it touches, and it spreads as long as there is material to burn. It alters the chemical composition of its environment entirely.
That captures the dynamic he sought. The text asserts that this fire of love is meant to be communicated to everyone around us. He uses the Latin term socialator, meaning socially or together.
So it's inherently communal.
It is not an isolated endeavor. It must alter the environment.
And it isn't restricted to an exclusive club, either. It doesn't stay within the walls of a monastery.
Far from it. He states that genuine love rises above the creature and plunges into God. Because it is rooted in God, it wishes happiness and good to all friends and foes alike.
Friends and foes, that's a difficult standard.
Why does it wish good to foes? Because that is God's will. God's love descends to all, so the fire must reach everywhere, without distinction.
But if love is a fire, we have to acknowledge what fire does to its fuel. Fire consumes what it burns. It destroys the original form of the material to release energy. To love with this kind of fire, to spread it to friends and foes, requires fuel.
And what is the fuel in this analogy?
In his theology, the fuel is the self. It requires the ultimate giving of oneself.
This brings us to the ultimate conclusion of his theological logic: love without limits.
One of the sources notes an early Mass intention from his first days as a priest. He prayed for love to the point of being a sacrifice. The Latin phrase is pro amoris ad victimam, for love, even unto being a victim, a sacrifice.
He also taught that the limit of love is to love without limits.
This is where we must connect his lifelong theological preparation back to where we started, his final days in the concentration camp. The texts emphasize that his death was a martyrdom of charity.
In keeping to our strict rules, we are looking at this purely as the historical fulfillment of his theological thesis.
Right. His life culminated in a voluntary immolation out of supreme love for a stranger. It wasn't a sudden break from his normal life. It was the final calculation of his equation.
It was the logical endpoint of his consecration. There's a quote in the source material that is highly relevant here. The martyrs had already immolated themselves 100 times in their hearts before they were sacrificed in reality.
Immolated in their hearts before the physical reality. That phrase shows how impossible it is to separate the man's final physical action from his intellect.
They are completely intertwined.
The theology we have been discussing, the action and reaction, the rigorous conformity of the will, the consecration as property, the fire, none of that was just abstract theory for a textbook. It was a highly rigorous preparation for an inevitable conclusion.
He viewed his daily sacrifices, his severe hardships, his relentless work, and his eventual death as the necessary requirements of a love that seeks full unification with God.
The fuel for the fire.
He even asked his mother to pray that he would love without limits. When you give yourself as property to be consumed by the fire of God's love, physical death is simply the final manifestation of a will that has already been completely sacrificed. The fuel is finally consumed.
So let's pull back and look at the entire structure of what we explored today. We can trace this profound arc of his thought. It starts in eternity with the burning, active love of the Trinity. That love cascades down, a deliberate separation, a descent of grace through the Holy Spirit and the Immaculate Conception.
Then it meets the human will. Through total consecration, the flawed human will is transferred as property and merged with the perfect will of Mary, allowing it to resonate perfectly with God.
And finally, it explodes outward. It becomes a fire of sacrifice that consumes the world, a love without limits that willingly goes into a starvation bunker because the will has already been handed over. It is a complete theological circuit. The physics are sound.
A complete circuit of descent and ascent. And there is a final striking concept in his writings that encapsulates this entire framework. It's a deep, unresolved theological reflection that summarizes the mechanics of this love.
What is that final thought from the texts that you want to leave the listener with?
He posits that creation's reaction of love cannot ascend to the Father except through the exact same path it descended. Just as God's love came to earth from the Father through the Spirit and the Son, humanity's love must return to God through the Son and the Spirit. And in this return, it utilizes the Immaculate Conception as the ultimate, necessary meeting place where uncreated love and created love become one forever. The path down is the path back up.